This is going to be a subject that, this is kind of going to go throwing back at me. This is going to make me seem hypocritical, especially with my past videos that I have done. So, let's go ahead and kind of recap of who I am, and going into the subject itself. So, if you don't know who I am, I am a retro oldie gamer. In other words, I grew up with like the NES, N64 mostly, PS1, PS2, GameCube, Xbox, and all that stuff. So my ideal of gaming is that the game is right there, 100%, no added content whatsoever. It's a fully finished product. Now, in today's standards, that is practically a far stretch of the imagination. Having a perfect game that has no requirement of patches, no requirement of anything like that. And even to this day and age, we now have companies that are relying on gimmicks like DLC or microtransactions or loot boxes. Dear God, do we even have those? I don't know why. But the problem is that with digital content as it is, it's going to happen regardless of what's going to happen. It does, you know. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. The only time I ever do DLCs is if it's a game that I really, really, really enjoy. And there are few games that I do actually purchase DLCs for. And most of these DLCs is mostly like extended story or stuff like that. For example, with Bloodborne with the Old Hunters DLC and stuff. Beyond that, nothing else. And, well, obviously, a lot of people have already talked about this numerous times. In fact, this has been talked about before its ultimate release, and that is Kingdom Hearts 3. And here's the thing, you know, my personal opinion towards Kingdom Hearts 3 is that I want it to be fully there. I don't want anything added on there. I want it completely there. That was me before the game came out. Okay, that was me before the game even came out. So, naturally, my opinion has changed to some degree. And it's to a point to where Kingdom Hearts 3 is my second favorite in the series. You know, it beats Kingdom Hearts 2. Kingdom Hearts 1, it's a close first. Let that be the phrase. It's a close first favorite, but Kingdom Hearts 1 just has a little bit of something that I like better, you know. Kingdom Hearts 3 does a lot of improvements to the series. It does a lot of improvements. It does a lot of stuff that I love. There's a lot of stuff that I enjoy. But there are a few things that I don't care much for, but they're mostly nitpicks. Let's put it this way. Compared to Kingdom Hearts 2, they were actual complaints. In Kingdom Hearts 3, they were mostly nitpicks at this point. So it's like, you know what? It's a close first. Not an immediate first favorite, but it's a close favorite. You know, compared to Kingdom Hearts 1. But Kingdom Hearts 3 is an enjoyable game, and I absolutely enjoy the living heck out of it. To a point where I've had this kind of blew up in my mind. And that is, wonder what type of DLC we're going to get for Kingdom Hearts 3. At that point, I literally look at myself and I go, what am I flippin' talking about? Have I lost my flippin' mind? And the answer to that is, no. I haven't lost my mind. And there are reasons why. Number one being that of, if you enjoy the game that much, then it only makes sense that you would want more out of that game. And yes, the game itself is a finished product, regardless of what people say. It is an absolute finished project. Even Nomura himself has said that it is a 100% finished project. Any DLC that we even come out with isn't based on the main story or anything of that like. It is literally the complete story. It is the complete game. There you go. But on the other hand, you know, when it comes down to it, if the game is that much more enjoyable, then why not go ahead and put DLCs into a game, you know? If it's sold really well, if people really enjoy it, and if it's in high demand of it, then yeah, let's go ahead and put DLCs into Kingdom Hearts. And before anyone asks, I do know the concept of Kingdom Hearts itself, okay? And I understand where people are coming from, but this is where you need to kind of listen to the important stuff, okay? So, back into the PS2 age, you know, when Kingdom Hearts 1 first came out, in my personal opinion, it was still considered to be the final product. It was still an enjoyable experience. However, though, I found out years later that it had a final mix version, which, if you don't know what a final mix version is, it's basically where it's the original game, but with some added stuff onto it. And the funny thing is that it didn't really hinder the main game experience. If nothing else, it kind of improved it to some degree. What was the fact that you actually have gummy ships in Kingdom Hearts 1? You have the fact that the Moogle shop has changed drastically to where it features the rare Heartless. You also have the fact that technically it has an extra added secret boss. It also has 2 extra Keyblades. So right there is the extra content that was in the final mix for Kingdom Hearts 1. Kingdom Hearts 2, however, that's where it bumps up to the 9th degree. Basically, the original one basically has some form of a lackluster when it comes to the overall completion aspects. Not to say that it was bad, but it didn't really have anything that was worthwhile at the end of it all. In Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, on the other hand, that's where things changed. For starters, you have the fact that it features the remaining organization members that was defeated back in Castle Oblivion, and you got to fight them in Kingdom Hearts 2 style faction. Later on, though, when you beat the game, or before then, depending on how far you get into the game, you actually have access to a place called the Chamber of Remembrance. And once you completed it, you officially got to fight all 13 organization members in Organization Data boss fights. And this is where the icings on the case becomes extra good. This is just the best part of the entire game itself. But that's not the only thing that makes it unique. You also have the fact that, crap. That's not good. You have the fact that technically that there are some extra stuff added onto it in terms of the Jiminy Journal, being that of the puzzle pieces. These puzzle pieces are everywhere within the game, and by collecting them, when you complete the puzzle, you get extra items added on into it. So that's an extra discovery thing that you can do in order to look around in order to find these pieces to make the overall game a little bit more lengthy and a little bit more enjoyable. You also have the fact that other than the organization boss fights, you also have the Lingering Will, which is by far the hardest boss in Kingdom Hearts history. Next to the Aqua Phantom boss fight, but that's to a different degree anyway. But that one is considered to be the hardest boss fight. With that being said, however, overall, when it comes down to Final Mix, Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix basically is the best of the Final Mix itself. And I stand what I say. The Kingdom Hearts 2 in terms of Final Mix is the best. Kingdom Hearts 1 is the best overall game. Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, however, is better delivery. That said, those two aren't the only one that also had the Final Mix added on into it. You also have the fact that Burst by Sleep also has added content into this fray. What was the fact that most of it is mostly driven towards the Mirage Arena. What was the fact that you have the added Monstro boss fight? You also have 2 extra boss fights that you can fight. One of them being Master Ericus' armor, and No Heart, which is basically Master Xehanort's armor. So, while it doesn't do anything major, it does add some extra features that most people extremely enjoy out of the game. So, why don't we theorize as to what could Kingdom Hearts 3 have in terms of additional content? Keep this in mind, there are no rules except for the stretch of the imagination, and we're going to go in order based on the least likely that's going to happen, meaning that it probably will never happen, and the most likely meaning that we will definitely see this if they decide to do DLC for Kingdom Hearts 3, which at this point we can all agree that they're probably going to do this. If Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 had a Final Mix version, Kingdom Hearts 3 is definitely going to have a Final Mix version with DLC added on into it. So obviously, there is going to be a Kingdom Hearts 3 Final Mix. They haven't announced it yet, and as of right now, they're taking a break. But if they so desire to, there will be DLC added on into Kingdom Hearts 3. And with the exception of that of, like, for example, Kingdom Hearts Days with the HD cinematics, there hasn't been any DLC for Kingdom Hearts in its history. So this would be technically the very first DLC that we've ever received in terms of actual additional content, and not just scenes added on into it. So with that said, let's go ahead and theorize. So first and foremost, the least likely that's going to happen, and this is something that me and Delmar both want, and I'm sure everyone wants this as well, but let's face it, the likelihood of this actually going to happen is going to be absolutely zero. It's probably not going to happen at all, and that is the addition to other worlds. I don't think we're ever going to see that happen anytime soon. To see additional worlds being added into Kingdom Hearts 3 is basically more or less a slap in the face for fans when you think about it. And the reason why I say this is because of the fact that, say for example, they add something completely different. Like for example, Beast's Castle. It doesn't have any story-driven element whatsoever. It's just a world that you explore with a couple of chests that you open, with a handful of lucky emblems that you can find, and if you find all of it, you get access to a boss of that world. And you could have access to, once you beat the boss, an additional Keyblade that you can use when it comes to Keyblade transformations. Again, you think about it, if you did all that, a lot of fans would be disappointed in being like, why wasn't this in the final product? It's something that you just won't see. Now, let's say for example they did actually add in a couple of worlds, or at least one new world. The most likely candidate that this is probably going to happen is one of three things. One of them would be Destiny Islands. Now keep in mind, this is spoiler alert, technically you do go to Destiny Island. You don't really interact with the world, but you do go to Destiny Island eventually. So the fact remains that the fact that you don't explore Destiny Island makes it kind of weird that it's in there, you just don't technically explore around in it. So that could be an added world to it. You have the heavily encounterment of Radiant Garden. Obviously, due to the fact that it was mostly heavily story-driven, it wasn't a really visible world. So to see it be a visible world would be probably likely, and depending on how they do it, with the exception of those two, we could see Disney Castle, or Disney Town, whichever one they decide to use. Probably both. In this case, I would like to see them adding both Disney Castle as well as Disney Town at this point in the time. Again, this is all just speculation, this is all just the ideal concept of what DLC could be, and this is the least likely that could happen. But, with that being said, what is the most likely that could be added on in terms of Kingdom Hearts content? Well, let's say for example they decided to add a couple more battle gates. Now these things, if you're not familiar with, basically look like the same thing that was in Dream Drop Distance, with the exception of these are more or less challenging enemies encounterments in larger range. Some of them are a little bit overwhelming. The bigger enemies actually have double HP at this point, and it's just an overall enjoyment in the entire scheme of things. Now, the biggest thing is that we didn't really see like a boss rush mode type battle gate. We did kind of see a few bosses encounterment, some of the sub-bosses for that matter, and we even have a super boss technically, depending on how you want to look at it as a super boss. But with that being said, the overall battle gates, they're really fun and I really enjoy them. But there wasn't really one that you could say that this one was a boss rush mode, where basically you fought against each boss and you fought the next one and the next one and the next one. Sort of like that of the 0.2 Fragmentary Passage one. And I kind of wish they had done that, but at the same time I can kind of see why they didn't do it, because with the additional of the Organization 13 members, they kind of had to be careful of like, okay, we have the Organization 13 that they still have to fight. If we add in a boss rush mode, this could get overwhelming for them. And they're right, it would get overwhelming. But it's a challenge that most of us would want to take part of. So just to let you know, I want a battle gate where I have the ability to access the boss rush mode. But however, because of it being DLC and everything like that, let's make it a restriction, where the only way you can unlock this is if you actually basically beat all 14 battle gates. So that would be interesting, is that if you went on ahead and beat all 14 of the different battle gates, 13 if you want to be particularly restricted depending on the super boss and everything like that, you could have access to where you could fight all of the bosses in general. And each boss that you beat, you would get to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and ultimately to the final part. Again, this would not get unlocked until after you unlocked all of the battle gates. In fact, technically, according to what someone says, some of them doesn't get unlocked right away until you beat the game first time through. So, needless to say, this would actually work in terms of how the boss battles would be represented. At least that's a theory ideal in itself. May not be the overall best ideal, but it is something that I think could most likely be seen, is these different battle gates with the addition of a super boss rush mode battle gate, probably. We could see extra keyblades. Now, this is something that I've actually been thinking about. Not to say that we will actually see this in terms of the final product, but I kind of see them releasing the so-called purchase DLC keyblades that we had whenever they came out. You know, you had the Amazon one that they had, or 7-Eleven, depending on where it came from first. You had the Sony exclusive one, you had the Microsoft exclusive one, and then you had the Keyblade, which technically you get it in the game anyway, just to let you guys know, where if you're in one of the top ranks, you get a digital code to where you can use the Starlight Keyblade as your starting Keyblade, which technically at this point right now, technically you can get it in the main game, so it really doesn't matter. It's just early access to that Keyblade, which is kind of cool, I suppose, but still nonetheless, yeah, you get it later on. But I do kind of see them adding in extra Keyblades, especially some Keyblades where they're like, you know what, we had an ideal for an additional Keyblade weapon, but we didn't add it into it because we couldn't think of anything else that we could do with it. So let's just go ahead and have it to where they can get access to this secret Keyblade if they do a certain requirement. Obviously, there would be a Keyblade requirement for defeating all the battle gates, which would make sense, but I think at that point, you would already have the ultimate weapon, and at that point, you're already OP as all you'll get at. You'll see what I mean once you finally get the ultimate weapon. But there could be another Keyblade that you could get once you beat all of the bosses in the gummy ship. There could be like an extra Keyblade that you get if you got all of the Kingdom Classic minigames and stuff. There could be any number of Keyblades that you could get, and keep in mind, I haven't done everything in the game yet. I'm slowly doing that, but at the moment right now, I haven't done 100% of everything. But who's to say what other Keyblades they could add in terms of DLC? Now, this is kind of a long shot, and I admit this is a long shot. But I would like to see a couple more super bosses, really. I really do. Don't get me wrong, the super boss that we had in the main game was really fun and interesting. I really enjoyed it. But, I would like to see a couple more different designs in terms of super bosses. And let's put it this way. In the past couple entries when we had the final mix versions of Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, the secret boss that they added in for the final mix had something to do with the next entry of the game series. You have Kingdom Hearts 1 Final Mix Super Boss being that of the Unknown, which we all know as Xemnas, which is this superior of the Organization 13 from Kingdom Hearts 2. And in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, you have the Lingering Will, which is basically Terra's armor that was seen in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. So, needless to say, I can kind of see them adding an extra super secret boss that has something to do with Kingdom Hearts 4, or whatever they're going to name it at this point. It's hard to say if it's going to be 4 or if it's going to be called something else. We don't know at this point. We just know that there's more Kingdom Hearts game later on. What there is. And I'll go into deeper detail later on once we get to that point. But still, basically, I would like to see another secret super boss being added into the game in some form of way. Now, I know people are going to be asking me, okay, BlackCross, well, that's good and all, but what about critical mode? Well, there was actually a rumor going around saying that critical mode was actually supposed to be added into Kingdom Hearts 3, but there was some complications in terms of programming and issues, so it wasn't in the main product. So obviously there will probably be a patch later on where critical mode will be accessible. When this will be, I don't know, but critical mode will be on the way in terms of a patch. It's not completely gone, it will be added in eventually. So I have no doubt in my mind that critical mode will definitely be in Kingdom Hearts 3, especially whenever people made the complaint of where Kingdom Hearts 3 is just a little too easy. So yeah, I would imagine that eventually they would be like, alright guys, you thought it was easy? Well, here's critical mode. Enjoy. And it's hard as shit. So, we asked for it, and we got it. It's just gonna hurt really badly. But anyway, guys, I just want to kind of give you my thoughts and opinions about future DLC for Kingdom Hearts 3. I personally would like to see Kingdom Hearts 3 having more content in later on. Obviously, we probably won't see any, probably for like the next year maybe, depending. But who knows. And Tetsuki Nomura, I hope you do consider adding DLC, because let's put it this way. I enjoy the Kingdom Hearts series, and I really love Kingdom Hearts 3. So give us more reason to play more Kingdom Hearts 3, which I guarantee you there's already enough reason to play Kingdom Hearts 3 anyway. So with that being said, I'll see you in the next video.